delighted to be here at the Hay Festival BBC stage to interview Jon Ronson. Jon is an author, journalist, screenwriter, broadcaster, and documentary maker. His uniquely unjudgmental, empathetic, and analytical style has made him one of our best-loved storytellers. His curiosity has taken him into worlds of religious and political extremism, conspiracy, Christianity, psychopathy, pornography, and even UFOs with Robbie Williams. His work is a translation tool between us, his audience, and the people who we find the most confusing and the most beguiling. He hones in on individual stories to help us better understand humanity, society, and in some uncomfortable moments, ourselves. Most recently, he's turned his attention to the culture wars in his fantastic new audio series, Things Fell Apart. Please give an enormous round of applause to Jon Ronson.
Thank you so much, Dolly. I thought we would start with just a very short, for people who don't know, Things Fell Apart. I thought I'd just start with playing you just a couple of clips, and then there's a little surprise, and then Dolly and I will talk for the rest of the thing. Most of Things Fell Apart was about how things fell apart, but one of the episodes was about how things came together. And so I wanted to just tell you a little bit about that. It's set in the 80s when Christian evangelism declared war on AIDS. And in fact, Jerry Falwell, who was like the main Christian evangelist at the time, was so convinced that AIDS was God's punishment that he convinced President Reagan not to say the word AIDS in public, which he didn't for 4 years. And so the disease grew in silence. And in the middle of this was one televangelist who felt very uncomfortable about this, and her name was Tammy Faye Baker. She was a televangelist pioneer and the presenter of the afternoon chat show for Christian housewives, Tammy's House Party. And Tammy had been having a rough time of it. The other televangelists would mock her, and they'd make fun of her overuse of makeup, and so she would put on more makeup as a suit of armour, and she grew lonelier and more anxious, and she found herself identifying less with her peers than with the objects of their scorn. And in 1985, she did something that had never been done before.
And come on in. It's just so nice to have you here with us. We have an experience today that really is touching to me. Right here on my right, I have a young man named Steve Peters, and I'd like to introduce you to Steve. Steve is a patient of AIDS, and he so generously allowed us to talk to him today.
This is Tammy's son,
what
Jay.
a brave thing. Now you're going to go and show everybody in the Christian world that you're an openly gay pastor with AIDS?
And no one was surviving. Everyone was dying.
No one was surviving. Everyone was dying. I mean, it was horrific. And he was very gaunt. And he was only given, I think, 6 months to live.
Hi, I'm the Reverend Steve Peters.
And you're alive.
Yes, I am indeed alive. This is 2021, and I am very healthy and alive, yes.
So the interview between Tammy and Steve started, I've got to say, a little awkwardly.
Steve, have you ever had a sexual experience with a woman?
Well, no, I've how do I put this delicately? I've necked with a woman, but no, I have not had a sexual experience with a woman.
Do you think maybe you just haven't given women a fair try?
No, my orientation is towards men.
Uh-huh.
After that, Tammy tried to connect with Steve via flattery, which was also a little awkward.
You know, a lot of times, you know, the gay community, some of them, you know, some men look like a homosexual. Other men do not. You do not. You do not. You do not look like, you know, you do not look effeminate at all.
But then something happened. It started when Tammy asked Steve if people kept their distance from him because AIDS was so frightening.
Yes, Tammy, that happens. And I was asked not to use the bathroom in one person's home. I remember going to a party once where every time I finished my soft drink, the host took the glass into the open kitchen, one of these California kitchens, you know, and steam cleaned it.
You know, and how sad that we as Christians, who are to be the salt of the earth, and we who are supposed to be able to love everyone, are afraid so badly of an AIDS patient that we will not go up and put our arm around them and tell them that we care.
Yes.
But I want to tell you, there's a lot of Christians here who love you and who wouldn't be afraid to put their arm around you and tell you that we love you and that we care.
Thank you, Tammy. God bless you for saying that. I think that's a very, very important thing
Well,
you're
you know,
doing.
To thank me for doing the interview, she sent me audio cassettes of her singing. In the following few months after the interview, I got very, very sick once again. I went blind and I wasted away to nothing. I was just a skeleton. And she had sent me this album that was called Don't Give Up on the Brink of a Miracle, with the song, Don't Give Up on the Brink of a Miracle. Don't give in, God is still on the throne. And I would sing along with her over and over again. And I did get a miracle. I recovered my eyesight and I gained weight again. And I got my miracle. I was blind and now I see. Amazing grace.
So after that particular episode of Things Fell Apart aired, I got so many messages from Radio 4 listeners who told me that they had to pull over their car because they were crying so hard and it was dangerous for them to drive. So before Dolly and I talk, we had a little surprise for you all. Would you please welcome live on Zoom from California, the Reverend Steve Peters.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here with you.
Steve, hi. Welcome to a field in Wales.
It's great to see you.
So, Steve, I want to ask you, so you told me that something happened the day that interview went out, something that happened in the studio. There was a telephone call that came through to the studio.
Yes, somebody called PTL and told them that she was so moved by the interview between me and Tammy Faye because she had a grown son who was dying of AIDS, and she had been terrified that he was going to go to hell because, of course, everything she had learned from the conservative Christian church was that AIDS was God's punishment against gay people and that gay men were going to hell. And she knew from the interview finally that her son was going to go to heaven and not hell. And she was greatly relieved. So it made a huge difference for her.
So when you got home after doing that interview, how did you think it went?
Oh, my God. I thought I did a terrible job. I found myself second guessing everything I'd said and felt like, oh, I should have said this. I shouldn't have said that. I wish I put this differently. And oh, my God, I told a neighbor and friend I was so glad that no one I knew would ever see this.
So when did you first get an inkling that wasn't going to be the fate of that particular interview?
Well, it was about a year and a half later when I was at an international conference of my denomination, the Metropolitan Community Churches, and our moderator and founder, Reverend Troy Perry, played the Tammy Faye Baker interview to open the entire conference in front of 1,000 people. And I put my head in my hands and just, oh, no, he's not doing this. And I started squirming and squirming. Well, the people started paying close attention. And by the end of the interview, they all stood up and cheered for minutes. And I was shocked, but everybody seemed to think it was a very important moment.
Well, I spoke to an academic who was an expert in women in televangelism, and she said that your interview with Tammy, more than any other single thing, was the thing that healed the rifts between Christian evangelism and the LGBT community, and maybe even eventually paved the way to the acceptance of gay marriage. And that's what she feels.
Wow. Well, that's very flattering.
I called the episode a miracle because, well, there's more than one miracle. I mean, the first miracle is that you're alive, and I believe that you are the longest living person with full-blown AIDS in history.
that I know of, that we know of. If there's somebody else who lived longer, I would love to know it. At this point, it seems like I'm it.
Right. And the second miracle is just how well it went. And I think there's a third miracle, which is that every time I talk to you, Steve, you're just the most ebullient person. You just shine light on the world. You really do. So after I made my thing, there was a movie made, The Eyes of Tammy Faye. And so you got to know Jessica Chastain, who played Tammy Faye.
I did, indeed. Yeah, she told me that she bought the rights to the story when she saw my interview with Tammy Faye on YouTube, that she was so moved by our interview that she decided to do the film.
She won an Oscar, and didn't she invite you to the Oscar party?
Well, to the Oscar nominees luncheon before the Oscar awards. And it was just amazing to be Jessica Chastain's date for this very big luncheon with all the Hollywood heavyweights.
And that was the year of Will Smith.
Amazing.
Did you get to meet Will Smith?
Will Smith was sitting right behind me at the next table. He was certainly really present, within slapping distance, actually.
Well, Steve, thank you so much. It's such a delight talking to you. You're one of my favourite people that I've ever interviewed in 35 years of doing this. So
you're one of my favorite interviewers. So
thank you. Well, God bless you, Steve. The Reverend Steve Peters.
God bless you.
I'm glad that's not my laptop, because one time I changed things over when I was on stage and there was like 1,000 people there. And for a moment, everybody could see the names of all of my desktop folders. No. And one of them was called Forbidden Animal Love. It's because my son was doing a school project on Romeo and Juliet with different animals. You don't need to know that.
Jon, staying on Things Fell Apart for a moment, I'm so interested that you chose to do a series about the culture wars. There is nothing more controversial, even the words, the culture wars. If I'm ever in a social situation where they come up, it kind of fills me with panic and dread. Yeah. What was it that drew you to it?
I was seeing friends fall apart. I have a former friend, well-known comedy writer, who fell so far down a particular culture war rabbit hole that he got completely trapped and couldn't find his way back out, to the extent that he lost his family and he lost all of his work. And now he's just trapped in a sort of circular thinking about, fighting the war. And I found that so awful. And you see, he's an extreme version, but there's lots of people all over the place who are becoming caricatures of themselves, extreme versions of themselves. And I was kind of obsessed with trying to figure out what were the mechanisms of how people fell apart. And I thought, like you said, Dolly, I didn't want to do something that would pour oil on the flames. Yeah. So I thought the way to do it would be to go back in history and try and find the origin stories. And what's so great about that is you find the most incredible, unexpected human stories. And the stories, the nuanced human stories, become more important than the ideology.
Yes.
And ultimately, if we're going to get past a world where we're all overwhelmed by ideology, the way to do it is to tell more complex, nuanced human stories.
And something that you touched on with that particular episode, something you touched on in your introduction, is that it was the episode that most people loved, that really resonated. And there is something very touching about the ending of the series where you say people are exhausted of the culture wars and people are longing for connection. Did making this series give you hope for discourse of the future?
Well, you'll get people saying, I was so moved, I don't want to fight these wars anymore. But then they just go back to it.
Yeah.
So all we can do is just put our stories out into the world and hope that they will have some kind of impact. But no, if anything, the culture wars have just got worse. When I wrote my book, Say You've Been Publicly Shamed, I thought, well, this will put an end to shaming. And I remember my publisher, when I wrote Say You've Been Publicly Shamed, just before the book came out, he sent me a box of cookies. And he said something like, fasten your seatbelts. The next few months are going to be a rocky ride. And
a terrible thing to receive.
I know. Well, I wrote back to him and I said, what do you mean? And he said, some people are going to hate the book. And I thought, How's anyone going to hate it? I'm right. But evidently, not.
You've ended public shaming, you've ended psychopaths.
I thought if I pointed out that we are all kind of victims of powerful people with nefarious intent, tech utopians prodding at us, for money-making reasons, politicians prodding at us for their political reasons, these faraway people. I thought if I could point all of that out, then maybe people will realize, oh my God, I'm being manipulated. But no, because when the flame is burning hot, people don't really care how they got there, right? They're just happy to fight the fights.
These stories are so important, and you are going to be making more stories like this.
Yes, I am making season 2 of Things Fell Apart at the moment with my great producer, Sarah Shebia, who's right over there. We're halfway through making it. I'll tell you one thing. I don't want to give away what the stories are, but I'll tell you what's linking them. They're still culture war stories, and they're still origin stories. They still start in places where you would never expect. And then there's a kind of, strange road that takes us to places, which is, I think, the thing that people like most about the series.
Yes.
You start in such obscure places. A hippie commune in the Swiss Alps in the 60s. Like, how is that going to become? So we're still doing that. But they've got one thing in common, all the stories that we're doing, is that at one point in each of the narratives, lockdown happens and everybody's brains explode. And so I think COVID is very chronicled, but I think what's under-chronicled is lockdown and what we all went through. We went through something very odd.
Yeah.
And it affected people in very different ways. And I think people are ready to sort of start to think about that more. So this is like the lockdown years. Things Fell Apart, the lockdown years is my informal way of thinking of it.
And going back, looking at your work, when I was preparing for this interview, I was so astonished at how prolific your output has been, but how wide-reaching it has been, how many different mediums you've worked with, how many different modes you've worked in, how it's gone from, comic and eccentric to something like The Last Days of August, which is very dark. It's all different types of storytelling. And I just want to know how you have felt your audience change in your career as you go into these different places?
I definitely, when I would do talks, I noticed that, my first book, Them, which is about conspiracy theorists and the relationship between conspiracy theorists and extremism, when I gave talks for them, the audience would primarily be paranoid-looking men. And then as soon as I started writing about my domestic life, my audiences became open, smiling women. So that was a breath of fresh air. I deliberately wrote about my personal life because I really don't like journalism to be hierarchical. So, if I was looking at people's flaws and idiosyncrasies and their absurdities, it felt only fair to look at my own flaws and idiosyncrasies and absurdities. So I kind of turned the lens on myself. And for a few years, those were like domestic stories,
yes.
Just stories about fights with neighbours and the bubbles of, anger that we're all in.
Yeah. Well, so I came to your work in the 2010s when I just graduated as a journalism student, and I don't think of you as someone who plumbs their own life or makes themselves the subject. But there is so much amazing content out there of when you were doing just that earlier on in your career. Something that I found in preparation for this, which I just loved, and it just feels so anti the Jon Ronson I know, was that This American Life episode where there is an unsettled dispute which is haunting you from your school years, and you go back to a school reunion in this deliciously petty way to try and find some sort of closure.
Yeah, it started with me waking up in the middle of the night and realising that I was still annoyed with the boys who threw me into Roath Park Lake in Cardiff in 1983. This was many years later. So I found one of them online and emailed to inform him that I was now a best-selling author. And he emailed me back to say that that the reason why they threw me in the lake was because I was a pain in the arse. And the tenor of my email led him to suspect that I hadn't changed. So that didn't turn out how I had hoped. And then I went to the school reunion with a Radio 4 producer. And I ended up doing it for This American Life. It was funny. So, like, one of the kids, grown men, said, no, you've remembered it all wrong. We all jumped into the lake together in a kind of frenzy of shared joy.
Yes.
Which isn't how I remembered it. And then another one went up to the producer and said, no, we threw him in the lake because he was a pain in the ass. But yeah, it's funny. I thought that was like a kind of funny story about our own bubble of ridiculousness and how we all get completely worked up about stuff which doesn't really mean anything to anybody else. And so I put it out on This American Life, and I knew that This American Life was seeing it differently to how I was seeing it when I saw the title, what they called it, and they called it "Who Takes the Class Out of Class Reunion." So.
I mean, one detail you have missed, Jon, that I have to point out is that they asked you to donate something to the raffle, and Jon wants to donate a package called My Fantastic Life, which includes 2 signed best-selling books
By Nick Hornby.
and a personal note from Nick Hornby to you.
Right. I mean, I want you to know that I was doing an exaggerated version of myself in that story.
But it is very brilliant, and you should all go listen to it. I'm interested in whether you have any pull back towards that kind of introspection, or...
I don't want to ever return to family stuff. I think I've done that.
Yeah.
But I would say in my book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, that's about all of us, right?
Yes.
You know, the psychopath test, the men hysteric goats and them, they're about abuses of power happening far away in, military units or, I don't know, sort of far away places, corporate headquarters in the psychopath test. But it's So You've Been Publicly Shamed, the people abusing their power were and are us.
Us, yeah.
Yeah, so...
And that's why it was such a confronting piece of work for so many of us, I think.
Yeah, and I definitely got some stick for it. I think I was right. So I do think my work is getting more and more like into our world. Even if it's not domestic stories, it's still stories more about the life that we lead.
Well, going back further, something that back to the mid-late 90s, a moment that was very big for you that changed everything was your documentary featuring Omar Bakri, the militant leader. Can you tell me why that was such an important piece of work for you and why it changed everything, that programme?
Yeah, it was definitely our kind of breakthrough story, I'd say. So Omar Bakri Mohammed, who was militant Islamist, who lived about 4 miles away from me, and he said he wouldn't rest until he saw the flag of Islam flying over Downing Street. So I asked him if I could spend a year with him, while he tried to overthrow democracy. And he said, yes. And he said, I want something in return. And I said, what? And he said, can you drive me to Office World? Which is where he gets his, Islam, the Future for Britain pamphlets printed because of their special price promise. So then I kind of became Omar's chauffeur and for a year. And then he outed me as a Jew at his jihad training camp near Crawley. He said, look at me with the infidel John, who is a Jew. And they all went, and I said, surely it's better to be a Jew than an atheist. And I heard someone go, no, it's not. The thing is, I am an atheist. I don't know why, of all places, I'd decide to assert my Jewishness would be a jihad training camp. But that story happened to coincide with small cameras coming out for the very first time. In the old days, if you wanted to make a documentary, it would be like a crew with giant cameras. A bus turns up and we try and get people to pretend that we weren't there.
Yeah.
That's not journalism, that's acting.
Yeah.
So, and I really hated it. I had an incredible opportunity to make a series for BBC Two when I was 25. And I hated it. And it was such and I remember the director was like, I'm trying to do everything to make Jon happy, but he seemed so unhappy all the time. And that was the reason. It was like, this isn't what I want to do. It's getting people to replicate reality. And then these little cameras came out, tiny cameras, just as we started to make Tottenham Ayatollahs. And that's why we got so intimate with Omar. And, he forgot that we were making it for Channel 4. He thought we were just students. And And that documentary then did have ripples because other documentary producers would show that and say, look, if you use these little cameras, then you can really get places and get to things that people can't get to. So it became kind of influential in the industry as well as in our lives.
Well, staying on that subject of sort of gonzoism or like sort of discretion, how have you found your role as a documentarian as your public profile has increased? Have you had moments when you're interviewing a subject where they reference something they know about you or they reference you as a public person and you think, I wish I was slightly more invisible?
To be honest, I think it balances itself out. Sometimes I lose stories because I'm more well-known and people think it's kind of, intimidating, like it's too high stakes.
Right, yeah.
But then there's other times when I get to do things that people wouldn't have let me do for the same reason, because, I'm quite high profile.
Yeah.
So I do think the two things kind of balance each other out in the end.
Yeah.
So, for instance, the show I made about the pornography industry, I think they let me on to their sets because, I'm high profile and they were kind of impressed. But then there's other times when I've lost stories for that very reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in your work, you meet very controversial characters, you meet complicated figures, but you also meet very interesting people. Have you ever retained a friendship or a relationship with the subjects of your programs and books?
Yeah, I'm still friends with, Steve.
Yeah.
I'm still friends with Robbie Williams. I got a call, this is 2005, and I got a call from Caitlin Moran saying, stay by your phone, Robbie Williams has got a phone. And I thought, that's much too stressful, so I turned off my phone.
That's my girlhood dream.
Right.
That's my girlhood dream, as I'm sure it is every millennial woman.
Right. Well, I just got stressed out. So I went to dinner, and then I came back and there was a message from Robbie Williams on my answer phone, quite a long message, but the upshot was that he liked my book then, and he wanted to spend a night in a haunted house, and could I set it up for him? So I wrote to all of these ladies of the manor saying, dear lady, blah, I read that if the portrait in your drawing room is moved, a ghost appears. I have been contacted by the pop star Robbie Williams. And I thought no one would get back to me, but 100% of the people I emailed got back. They were throwing their ghosts at Robbie. They were their debutante daughters. Anyway, then in the end, Robbie changed his mind and decided he didn't want to spend a night in a haunted house. And I kind of grumpily thought, no wonder Robbie Williams and ghosts get on so well with each other. They both only manifest themselves when it suits them. But I ended up going on a UFO hunt with him. He hired a plane for the day to meet alien abductees.
What a sentence.
I know, right? He was very sweet, though. He told an abductee that when he joined Take That at 16, he felt like he'd been abducted by aliens. My favourite moment from that day was we got to his plane, and there was a woman standing there, and she said, Mr. Williams' friends, welcome, this is your plane for the day. She said, what I want to tell you is that Snoop Dogg uses this plane a lot. What I'm saying is you can do anything. And we all kind of looked at each other, and Rob's friend Brandon said, well, can we stand up as the plane lands?
Something that I think people love about your work so much is that you are so unjudgmental, you are so curious, you do really stretch the limits of empathy, I think, in all your work. It's a wonderful thing to listen to. I was just wondering, and you can be totally honest here, in the safe space of the Hay on Wye tent, which will then be broadcast everywhere, have you ever had moments of, okay, my judgmentometer is really being tested in this situation?
Oh, yeah. But I try and stay away from stories like that because, I think if you fill your head with judgment, there's no room for curiosity.
Yes.
And also, if you're just telling people things that they already know, like cult leaders are bad, then there's no point in doing the stories.
Yeah.
But once in a while, I have found myself in that situation.
Yeah.
I mean, the worst. This is going to bring everyone down. But one of the worst was this guy called Dave, who was the head of a religious group called the Jesus Christians. And they were all donating their spare kidney to strangers. So they wanted me to chronicle it. So there was this one kid called Casey, like in his 20s, and I said to Dave, he's only been in your group for a few weeks and he's about to give a kidney, shouldn't he be allowed a cooling off period? And Dave went nuts with me and withdrew access and sent me all of these messages, getting me to think about what I'd done and all the terrible things that I've done. And it was working, the gaslighting was working. I remember sitting on the beach in Norfolk with my wife and I was saying, maybe Dave's right. Maybe I am a terrible person. And then crazy people always go too far. and the bubble then burst. And what he did was, this is terrible what I'm about to tell you. There was a woman in Scotland called Christine who needed a kidney. And Dave messaged me to say that Christine was dying and he would instruct one of his members to give her a kidney. But if he did, I would only accuse him of manipulation. So he had decided to let Christine die and let her death be on my conscience.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. But, that went too far.
Yeah.
I no longer thought maybe Dave's right.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, Christine wasn't as sick and didn't die. So, but that's one occasion. But I very much try and stay away from situations like that. There was a time I did a documentary about Jonathan King, who was, prosecuted and convicted of having, sex with underage boys. And that was another occasion when some of the people in his circle were just so loathsome.
Yeah.
That I thought, I shouldn't be doing this story.
Yeah, and it didn't leave any room for wonder or
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And if you can't do that, if you can't tell people something new, enrich our feelings about people who we may, de-demonize demons, then there's no point in doing the story.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more question and then we're going to go out to audience questions. My last question is, I'm always interested with people whose work is in a public capacity about what that happens when it intersects with their personal life.
Yeah.
And if people react in a certain way to you, if people are always trying to prove they're not psychopaths, or if people are trying, I was very aware when I met Jeremy Paxman once, I didn't realise until afterwards that I picked a fight with him.
Right.
And it was because I just thought that was sort of the Jeremy Paxman experience.
Yeah.
Do people behave in a certain way around you that you've noticed in social situations away from work?
Well, a lot of people have come up to me and said that when they read the psychopath test, they started thinking that maybe they were psychopaths. And there's a line in the psychopath test where I say that if you're worried that you may be a psychopath, then it means you're not one.
Yeah.
Because psychopaths never worry about being psychopaths. It's what's to worry about? You've got no guilt, no remorse. I often think that psychopathy has to be the most pleasant feeling of all the mental disorders. People come up and say that to me a lot.
Yeah.
I have anxiety, which is the neurological opposite of psychopathy. My amygdala works too hard, and psychopaths' amygdala don't work hard enough.
Also, on the psychopath test, I don't think I'm the only woman in the tent who diagnosed all their ex-boyfriends as psychopaths after reading that book.
I diagnosed everybody who'd ever given me a bad review.
Oh, yeah, of course. Right, we're going to go to some audience questions. Do we have a mic? Yes.
Hi, so 25 or 30 years ago, there was a cultural war about homosexuality, but it just seems that in very, very little time, that culture war just disappeared. Mm. Do you think that could happen now? Do you think our current culture wars could just dissipate? And if they can, is there something we can learn from that dissipation that happened in the early 2000s?
Well, I should say, I don't want to oversell this idea, but I do think the Reverend Steve Peters, going on the Tammy Faye show, really had an awful lot to do with that culture war disappearing. When you hear two opposing people talking in such an emotional, moving, empathetic way, that can make a culture war end. But of course, what's happening now in America, especially with, in Florida with Ron DeSantis, that particular culture war is rearing its head again now. Drag Queen Story Hour and all of that are the new battlefronts in the culture wars in America. Books with gay themes are being banned in America. So actually that one died for 20 years, but now it's back. Mm. I don't know. These are quite dispiriting times for those of us who would rather that, we weren't riven by culture wars. One encouraging thing, though, is the way that people are fleeing Twitter. It's sad because there's much great stuff about Twitter, and if it goes down, wonderful things are going to go down along with it, like voiceless people having a voice and people being funny and eloquent, and it's very good for breaking news and so on. But, ever since Elon Musk turned Twitter into what it has, I think it's got a third of the value that it had when he took it over last autumn. So in a way, that's encouraging because it shows that people are fleeing the culture wars. But in another way, it's just very sad because there were wonderful things about Twitter too.
Did you keep your blue tick? That's the big question.
No, I didn't. They took my blue tick away.
Yeah, they took my blue tick away as well.
Yeah.
The real tragedy of the culture wars.
I got to say, I was glad about that because the thing I really loved about Twitter at the very beginning was that it was a level playing field. It was egalitarian. You'd follow somebody with 20 followers and somebody with 1 million followers.
Yeah.
It reminded me of I don't know if people remember those old Robert Altman ensemble movies where all these different lives would just intersect randomly. And that was what Twitter was. It was this wonderful, place of no hierarchy. And then what happened was that, legacy media like The Guardian would say, okay, we'll ignore Twitter and it will go away. And then it didn't go away. So then The Guardian thought, okay, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll do lists of who are the 10 best tweeters. And then everybody wanted to get on that list. So instead of people being unself-conscious on Twitter, everybody became more performative. And that was the first snake in the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's weird to think of it as that utopian place, but it totally was. When I think about graduating journalism school, it was a place where you could really thrive. Like it was a great place for you to showcase your work and to...
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a phrase back then, Facebook is where you lie to your friends, Twitter is where you tell the truth to strangers.
Yeah.
And when they say tell the truth to strangers back then, what they meant was being honest about yourself, being unself-conscious. And other people would say, oh my God, I'm exactly the same. And, ask any psychologist or psychiatrist and they'd say that is one of the, most, healing things, is to just be open. And then, of course, instead of people being open about their shameful secrets, the war, the hunt was on for shameful secrets.
Yeah, and it was weaponized. Yeah. The other phrase that I think of often with Twitter and its downfall is it was the place where rock stars thought that they were journalists and journalists thought they were rock stars.
Right.
Hi. One of the episode from Things Fell Apart that really stuck with me was there was a tale of a college professor. Did she resign, I think, in the end? After recommending a book to a student with quite a controversial,
it was Dick
provocative title. Yeah,
it was Dick Gregory's memoir, and it was the N word, and it was the word spelt out.
I think the thing that stuck with me from it was quite depressing because even more than sort of like all the right wing kind of attacking the left wing, and it was sort of friendly fire.
Yeah.
I wondered sort of what reaction that you kind of got from that story. Was there any sort of feedback from people, or even maybe a bit of blowback from it?
Actually, no. I think I keep dodging bullets when it comes to that kind of thing. I do get when So You've Been Publicly Shamed came out. I did get like a bit of a sort of frenzy of criticism, because I think unfair, and I think from people who didn't read the book, if I'm being entirely honest, because their perspective was that public shaming is a weapon that's used by the marginalised. So if I'm attacking public shaming, then I'm attacking marginalised people. But that, of course, isn't what I was doing in the book. So that did happen, and it was very sort of bewildering for a little while, but then went away. I remember I was at dinner with my wife in the middle of all of this, and I said, they're like the Khmer Rouge. And Elaine said, they're not like the Khmer Rouge. So thank God for a wife like Elaine.
Can I ask you, when you were writing that book, I found that book very confronting and it made me quite panicked reading it. Immersing yourself in that world and those stories of these people who's lost their lives in many cases, did it make you more trepidatious? Did it make you more anxious about having a public profile and what you broadcast?
Not what I broadcast, because you have to tell the stories that you want to tell. If you start censoring yourself, then you might as well not be doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to be ethical and thoughtful and smart. Like, you don't want to just tell like outrageous stories that will upset people. Well, I don't, because I'm not an agent provocateur in that way. But so it didn't do that, but it certainly made me despair a little bit more about human nature, about just our casual cruelty. One of the main stories in So You've Been Publicly Shamed is about this woman, Justine Sacco, who tweeted what she thought was like a joke mocking her own privilege. She was about to get on a plane to Cape Town, and she tweeted what she thought was like a South Park joke, making fun of her own privilege. Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white. And then she fell asleep, and then when she woke up 10 hours later in Cape Town, and she turned on her phone, and straight away there was a text from somebody she hadn't seen since high school that said, I am so sorry to see what's happening to you right now. And then another text, you need to phone me right now. You are the worldwide #1 trending topic on Twitter. And nothing like this had ever happened before. But the thing that really sort of startled me about that night was people realised that she was on a plane and oblivious to her destruction. And that was hilarious to people. It was hilarious that we knew something that she didn't know, that she'd been fired and her life would never be the same. She'd be the AIDS tweet woman forever. And that was hilarious. And she united a lot of people that day, from misogynistic trolls through to like social justice people, through to Donald Trump, hipsters, because a hashtag started trending worldwide. Hashtag has Justine landed yet? And people were tweeting, I'm at this bar and I'm dying to go home, but I can't until hashtag has Justine landed yet. As I watched that, I felt something had shifted in the culture that night. There's 2 occasions in my life where I really felt something has shifted in the culture. And that was one. And the other was when Donald Trump came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists. And on both occasions, I thought something's changed and things aren't going to go back to how they were.
Another question?
I'm wondering if I can ask a question for both of you to answer. You both obviously create a lot in the public eye, and we talk about criticism. How do you personally deal with like negative reviews, and does anything you see on social media that's negative impact what you create forward?
Well, I diagnose them as psychopaths. I try and not be bothered. Like, what I noticed over the years is that if I get a really good review, then I'm happy for about 3 seconds. And so I kind of made a decision really early on that I'm going to be as unhappy about negative reviews as I am happy about positive reviews. So that was the kind of rule I always took with me, that like I don't obsess over bad like reader comments or anything for that reason. I mean, everyone's an individual and everybody comes to your work with their own lives. You just put it out there. So I really try and not obsess over that stuff. What about you, Dolly?
Yeah, I try very, very hard. I think a metaphor that someone said to me once is just trying to stay in a middle lane, just a steady middle lane, and not being yanked too far to the negative or too far to the positive. Because the reason why, hopefully, a person makes good work, that we would make good work, is that we're very in touch with our authentic beliefs and voice and self, and that's really the only way that you can keep a career going for a long time. So the way I've reframed it is engaging too much with negativity is that not only a threat on my mental health, but it's a huge threat on my work, because I don't ever want to be making something from a place of defensive-ness or self-consciousness.
Yeah. For me, the kind of joy, the reason why I do what I do is just I love sitting at home tinkering with stories, whittling away the big block of concrete until it becomes like a perfect story. And that's why I do what I do. And everything else, whether people like it or not like it, or it does well or it doesn't do well, it's kind of immaterial. There's an Isaac Babel line which I always love, which is, nothing pierces the heart with as much force as a full stop put in just the right place. And that's the reason why I do what I do, and nothing else matters really to me.
Well, that seems like a very brilliant note to end on, just in time. Thank you so much for your brilliant questions. Thank you for being such a great audience. Jon, thank you for Things Fell Apart. Thank you for all your stories in the world, and I can't wait to read and watch and listen to the many, many more that you will put in the world. So thank you very much, Jon Ronson.
Thank you. Thank you, Dolly. Thank you, everyone.